You feel it every day. A pickup truck's grille fills your entire rearview mirror, its headlights level with your head. You try to merge, but the driver of a massive SUV can't see you in their blind spot. In the grocery store parking lot, your sedan is a dinghy adrift in a sea of steel giants. This feeling of being smaller, more vulnerable, and less safe on the roads you travel every day is not your imagination. It is a statistical fact. Because of the sheer size and weight of modern vehicles, our roads have become deadlier. In the last decade, pedestrian fatalities in America have surged by over 70%. Traffic deaths overall are at a 20-year high, and the reason is simple. A collision between a 5,000-pound SUV and a 3,000-pound sedan is a battle of physics, and physics always wins. This has triggered a passive-aggressive arms race. To protect their families, people buy bigger cars. This, in turn, makes everyone else less safe, forcing them to upsize as well. But how did we get here? How did the family station wagon morph into a 3-ton behemoth with the blind spots of a commercial truck? This was not a gradual evolution, and it wasn't simply a response to consumer demand. It was the direct, calculated result of a single decision made in Washington nearly 50 years ago. A decision born from a crisis, a compromise, and a loophole. This is the story of how a law intended to make cars more efficient did the exact opposite. The thesis is this. The decision in 1975 to create a regulatory loophole for light trucks directly incentivized the creation of the modern, oversized SUV. It became more profitable for automakers to re-engineer our very idea of a family car than it was to re-engineer their actual car engines. They didn't just sell us bigger cars. They sold us a new, more dangerous American dream. To expose how this happened, we have to go back to a moment of national panic. A time when America's confidence was shattered by an enemy it couldn't fight. An enemy that controlled the one resource our entire way of life depended on. We have to go back to the day the gas ran out. October 1973. America's engines sputtered and died. Overnight, gas stations became scenes of chaos. Lines of cars stretched for miles, drivers waiting for hours, sometimes for nothing. Fights broke out. Fuel prices quadrupled. The Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries, OPEC, had turned off the tap. In response to American support for Israel in the Yom Kippur War, they declared an oil embargo. This decision sent a shockwave through the nation. For the first time, a handful of foreign states demonstrated they could bring the world's greatest superpower to its knees. The American automobile, long a symbol of freedom and prosperity, suddenly became a symbol of profound vulnerability. The big, gas-guzzling sedans rolling out of Detroit were a strategic liability. This wasn't just an economic problem, it was a national security crisis. This is why Washington had to act. The public fury was immense, and it was aimed squarely at the government for failing to protect them. President Gerald Ford, who inherited the crisis from Richard Nixon, knew that American dependence on foreign oil was no longer a theoretical problem. It was a clear and present danger. The pressure to do something was overwhelming. Because of this national humiliation, Congress was forced into action. They had to break OPEC's stranglehold. They had to make America energy independent. The most obvious target was the American car. Something fundamental had to change. Washington was about to declare war on the gas guzzler, forcing an entire industry to retool for a new reality. It was a necessary fight, but it would lead to a consequential compromise, one that would reshape our roads forever. Because of this national humiliation, Congress was forced to act. They created a new weapon in this war on waste. The Energy Policy and Conservation Act of 1975, buried inside it, was a set of rules that would change America forever. They were called the Corporate Average Fuel Economy Standards, or KFAs. The idea, pushed by President Gerald Ford's administration, was strategically simple. It treated fuel economy like a GPA. Each automaker had to meet a certain average miles per gallon rating across their entire fleet of cars. Sell a gas-guzzling sedan? You had to balance it out by selling a super-efficient small car. It was a direct order from Washington to Detroit. Make your cars smaller and lighter, or face massive fines. But here's the problem. What about a farmer's pickup, a plumber's van? These weren't family vehicles. They were tools. They needed to haul heavy loads and couldn't be engineered like a tiny commuter car.
Forcing them to meet the same standard would cripple entire industries.
This is why Ford's Secretary of Transportation, William T. Coleman Jr., had to make a consequential choice. He needed to protect these essential work vehicles, so he drew a line in the sand. Coleman's agency created two distinct categories: passenger cars and light trucks. Passenger cars would face a steep, demanding efficiency target. Light trucks, however, would be held to a much lower, much more forgiving standard. It was a pragmatic compromise, designed to solve a specific problem.
What Coleman didn't know was that he had just created a regulatory escape hatch,
A legal blueprint for a new kind of vehicle that would one day dominate American roads.
This decision is the reason our cars look the way they do today.
This new CAFE law landed in Detroit like a bomb.
For the big three automakers, Ford, GM, and Chrysler,
Was a declaration of an unwinnable war. The government was demanding they reinvent the American automobile on an impossible timeline. Think about what it takes to make a car more efficient. It's not just about a smaller engine. It's about redesigning everything. Lighter steel, advanced aerodynamics, new transmissions, complex fuel injection systems. This required billions of dollars in research and development, and a complete retooling of the factories that were the lifeblood of the American economy. It was a technological mountain they were being ordered to climb, with financial ruin at the bottom if they failed. Because of this immense pressure, the automakers fought back. They unleashed armies of lobbyists on Washington, arguing the standards were impossible, that they would destroy jobs and hand the market to Japanese competitors. In this fight, their greatest adversary was a woman named Joan Claybrook.
As the head of the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, Claybrook was the enforcer. A former consumer advocate under Ralph Nader, she was brilliant, uncompromising, and viewed Detroit's excuses with deep suspicion. To the auto executives, she was their worst nightmare. The battle was fierce. Claybrook demanded compliance. The industry demanded relief. It was a stalemate. And this is why Detroit strategists began looking for another way out. They realized fighting the technological war was too expensive, and fighting the political war was a grind. But that line William Coleman had drawn, the one between cars and light trucks, offered a third option. What if they didn't have to win the war? What if they could just switch sides? The motivation was now overwhelming. It was becoming strategically obvious that it was easier to re-engineer public perception than it was to re-engineer an engine. The answer to Detroit's prayer came from the one man desperate enough to try anything: Lee Iacocca. By the early 1980s, Iacocca was the head of a Chrysler corporation that was on life support. The company was bleeding money, hammered by Japanese imports, and crushed by the same CAFE regulations that haunted Ford. And GM Iacocca needed a miracle, and he found it by looking at that line in the sand between cars and trucks. His team's move was strategically unconventional. Instead of trying to build a better small car to fight the Japanese, they focused on a vehicle they had been developing for years: a family hauler. But here was the calculated twist. They would build it using the cheap, efficient front-wheel drive platform from their K car, but they would engineer it just enough to legally qualify as a light truck. This was the birth of the minivan. Think about what this meant. The Dodge Caravan and Plymouth Voyager drove like a car. They fit in a normal garage. They were marketed directly to suburban families as a replacement for the station wagon. And yet, for regulatory purposes, they weren't cars at all. Because of this classification, Chrysler was freed from the most punishing fuel economy standards. They could use older, cheaper engines and avoid billions in research. The result was an explosion of profit. The minivan single-handedly saved Chrysler from bankruptcy. But its most consequential legacy was the proof of concept it offered to the entire auto industry. Lee Iacocca hadn't just built a new vehicle. He had uncovered a brilliant new business model. This is why the minivan is the Trojan horse of our story. A friendly, practical family vehicle that smuggled the truck's regulatory advantages into the heart of the American suburbs. It proved you could get rich by convincing a family to buy a truck, even if it didn't look like one. Because of the minivan's astonishing success, every executive in Detroit took notice. Chrysler was printing money. The lesson was clear. The path to profitability wasn't through fighting the engineers in Japan, but through exploiting the loophole in Washington. The strategic question was no longer times you should build a family vehicle as a truck, but how time to make it even more desirable and more profitable than a minivan. This led directly to the automotive arms race of the 1990s.
The industry's next move was to take the minivan's blueprint and wrap it in a more powerful fantasy. The target was the iconic American station wagon. To kill it, automakers needed to sell America on something bigger, tougher, and more aspirational. They needed to sell the sport utility vehicle. Marketing departments went into overdrive, launching one of the most effective perception-shifting campaigns in modern history. How did they do it? They sold a new American dream.
First, they sold safety. Advertisements showed massive SUVs like the Ford Explorer and Jeep Grand Cherokee as steel cocoons, protecting families from a dangerous world. The high seating position was branded as a command view of the road. The subtext was clear: a bigger car is a safer car. Second, they sold freedom. Commercials rarely showed an SUV in a grocery store parking lot. Instead, they showed them fording rivers and climbing mountains, tapping into a deep American desire for rugged individualism and the untamed frontier. You weren't just buying a car, you were buying a lifestyle of adventure, even if you never left the pavement. This transformation, from utility vehicle to suburban status symbol, is what convinced millions of Americans to trade in their cars for trucks. It was a calculated strategy that made the SUV the new default family vehicle, setting the stage for a radical and dangerous escalation on the nation's highways. This marketing campaign was devastatingly effective, but it created a dangerous paradox on America's roads. The safety that automakers sold was purely individual. It was the safety of being inside the bigger vehicle. This led directly to a phenomenon safety experts call a safety arms race. The logic was simple and brutal. Think about it from the perspective of a family driving a Honda Civic in 1995. Suddenly, your mirrors are filled with the grills of Ford Explorers and Jeep Grand Cherokees. Their headlights are at your eye level. You know instinctively that in a collision between your 3,000-pound sedan and their 5,000-pound truck, physics has already picked a winner. You are going to lose. What is the rational response to protect your own family? It's not to hope for the best, it's to join them. This is why millions of families made a calculated decision. They traded in their sedans and wagons to buy an SUV of their own. But this only escalated the problem. The driver of a small SUV now felt dwarfed by the larger ones, compelling an upgrade to a Chevy Suburban. The person in the Suburban felt threatened by the new heavy-duty pickups. Each individual purchase, made for logical, defensive reasons, made the roads statistically more dangerous for everyone else. Pedestrians and cyclists were at greater risk. Drivers of smaller cars were too. This feedback loop is the engine of automotive gigantism. It explains why the solution for one family's safety became the source of everyone else's danger, turning American highways into a battlefield of ever-increasing size and weight. By the late 2000s, the light truck loophole was a widely recognized problem. With gas prices soaring and climate concerns growing, regulators in the Obama administration knew they had to act. Their goal was to close the loophole and force the entire industry, cars and trucks alike, towards better fuel efficiency. The solution they devised, implemented in 2011, seemed clever. It was a good idea that went horribly wrong. Instead of two crude categories, the new rule created a sliding scale. A vehicle's fuel economy target would now be based on its footprint, literally the rectangle formed by its four tires. Think of it as the vehicle's shadow on the pavement. The larger the footprint, the more lenient the fuel economy target. The logic was intended as a form of fairness. A giant pickup truck designed for work shouldn't be held to the same standard as a small commuter car. But here's the twist. Automakers, masters of navigating regulation, discovered a consequential flaw in that logic. They realized the system created a perverse incentive. What was the cheapest way to meet a tougher fuel economy target? Was it to spend billions on revolutionary engine R&D? Or was it to simply increase the vehicle's footprint by a few inches, thereby lowering the target you had to meet in the first place? This is what happened next. The 2011 rule, a policy designed to encourage efficiency, inadvertently created a new, more powerful incentive that directly rewarded size. It took the cultural arms race happening on the highways and codified it into federal regulation. The law itself now demanded bigger cars. This is how a well-intentioned law backfired. The 2011 footprint rule, designed to force efficiency, instead gave automakers a mathematical escape hatch. For an engineer staring at a balance sheet, The choice was brutally simple. They could spend billions developing lighter materials and hyper-efficient engines to meet a tough fuel target, or they could spend a fraction of that to simply widen the car's stance and lengthen its wheelbase by a few inches, thereby lowering the target they had to meet. It was a calculated, strategic, and entirely legal way to comply. Because of this, the American parking lot began to change. Look at any popular car model from the last 15 years. A Honda CR-V, a Toyota RAV4, even a Ford F-150. With each new generation, they swell. This isn't just a response to consumer taste. It's a direct response to the incentives baked into federal law. Automakers are not just selling bigger cars. They are gaming a system that actively rewards size over innovation. The very regulation meant to curb our fuel consumption became the blueprint for building ever larger vehicles. And so the story comes full circle. It begins with a single decision in 1975. A small regulatory loophole carved out for light trucks to protect American jobs. That loophole was exploited to create the first SUVs. The marketing genius of Lee Iacocca and his successors then sold this workaround as a new American dream of freedom and safety. This led to a cultural arms race on the highways, where families felt they had to buy bigger vehicles just to feel safe from everyone else's bigger vehicles. Finally, when regulators tried to fix the problem, their solution, the footprint rule, poured gasoline on the fire. It made the arms race the law of the land. This is why the cycle is so hard to break. The law incentivizes automakers to build bigger cars. The marketing convinces us we need them for safety, and our fear of being the smallest vehicle on a road full of giants confirms the decision. It is a perfect, self-perpetuating loop. The cars keep getting bigger, the roads more dangerous for pedestrians and smaller cars, and the efficiency gains we were promised are eaten alive by sheer, unnecessary size. A 50-year chain of unintended consequences, all leading to the oversized, aggressive, and dangerous vehicles dominating our roads today. If you found this eye-opening, hit subscribe for more deep dives into the hidden history that shapes our world, and leave a comment. Has the growing size of cars on the road changed your own buying decisions?